My name is Jacqueline Rivers, and until a few weeks ago, my life looked nothing like it does now. I lived in a tiny room above a bakery in Maple Creek, Colorado, a quiet American town with wide streets, old brick houses, and the smell of warm bread drifting through the air every morning. I had landed there because it was the only place I could go after my parents kicked me out of their home. The memory of that night still stings me whenever it rises in my mind. My mother had been yelling about how ungrateful I was. My father had shouted that he was tired of supporting me, and the argument grew so loud that I finally grabbed my coat and ran out into the cold. The door slammed behind me so hard it echoed down the street, and I remembered just standing there, shaking but silent, realizing I had nowhere to return to. I had $60 in my pocket, no car, and no one who cared enough to check where I went. A friend of mine got me the room above the bakery, and I told myself it would only be temporary, but I had no idea what the next day, or any day, would bring. For 3 days, I woke early and helped in the bakery in exchange for a warm meal. I wiped down tables, greeted customers, carried trays of pastries, and tried to ignore the hollow feeling in my chest. At night, I lay awake thinking about my life, wondering how everything had fallen apart so quickly and how I would ever stand on my own feet again. I felt abandoned, forgotten, and strangely small in a world that moved too fast for me to keep up. Every step forward felt like walking through thick mud. I told myself to be patient, to stay strong, but even those words sounded thin and weak inside my head. Then, on the morning of the third day, something happened that would change everything, more suddenly and more completely than I could have imagined. I was sitting on the old wooden bench outside the bakery, warming my hands on a paper cup of coffee, when a sleek black car turned onto the street. It didn't match the rest of Maple Creek, which was full of pickup trucks and dusty SUVs. This car looked like it belonged in a wealthy neighborhood on the East Coast, or maybe in some well-kept European village I had only seen in pictures. The car slowed as it approached, and when it stopped in front of me, the driver stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a gray suit, with a calm but serious expression on his face. He walked toward me with confidence, as if he knew exactly who I was before I could even guess his purpose. "Miss Rivers?" he asked, pausing a polite distance away. I nodded, confused and suddenly nervous. "My name is Ethan Wallace. I'm the personal lawyer of your uncle, Michael Everett." Hearing my uncle's name felt like a small jolt in my chest. Uncle Michael had lived in Ridgewood, Virginia, far from my world, but he was the only person in my family who ever made me feel seen. He used to send me postcards from places he visited, little notes telling me he believed in me. I hadn't spoken to him in years, mostly because my parents never liked him and discouraged me from staying in touch. But I always held on to those cards. They were proof that someone somewhere thought I mattered. "I'm afraid I have bad news," Ethan said gently, and I felt my throat tighten. "Your uncle passed away last week." Even though we hadn't spoken, the words hit me harder than I expected. A heavy silence settled between us. I looked down at my coffee cup, now trembling slightly in my hands. I whispered, I'm sorry to hear that." Ethan nodded with sympathy, but there was something in his eyes that told me he wasn't finished.
"There is more," he said.
"Mr. Everett left behind a will, and you are its sole heir." I frowned, not sure I heard him correctly. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said carefully, "that you have inherited $67 million. The world seemed to go still. The bakery noise faded, the street sounds dimmed, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if I was breathing. I stared at him, waiting for him to correct himself or say he misspoke. But he didn't. Instead, he handed me a folder with documents and explained that my uncle had been far wealthier than anyone realized. He had chosen to leave everything, not just the money, but also his house and his land, to me alone. My first reaction wasn't joy. It was disbelief, followed by fear. My life had been so full of hardship that receiving something this big felt almost dangerous, like holding a wild animal that might turn on me at any second. But as I opened the folder and skimmed the pages, the truth became impossible to deny. It was real. My uncle had given me everything. Ethan offered to drive me to the estate in Ridgewood, so I could see it for myself. I agreed, though my legs felt shaky as I climbed into the car. The drive took several hours, and during that time, I stared out the window, watching the mountains and fields pass by. My thoughts were scattered, tumbling in every direction. I wondered what the house would look like, why my uncle had trusted me with so much, and how my life could possibly change so fast. When we arrived at the estate, I felt my breath catch. The house stood tall and elegant at the end of a long stone path lined with oak trees. It had wide glass windows that reflected the afternoon light and a view of a quiet river that wound gently behind the property. It didn't feel like a home built for luxury. It felt like a place meant for peace, a place someone had poured love into. As I stepped inside, my footsteps echoed softly through the spacious halls. The rooms were filled with warm colors, old books, and framed photographs of landscapes from all over America and Europe. I could almost feel my uncle's presence lingering in the air, as if he were guiding me through each hallway, telling me, "This is yours now. You're safe here." For the first time in years, I felt something new, something steady and warm. It was safety. It was hope. It was the beginning of a life I never imagined I would be allowed to have. And it all started the moment a black car pulled up to a bakery in Maple Creek. For 2 days after arriving at my uncle's estate, I wandered through the hallways like someone walking inside a dream. Everything felt unreal: the polished wooden floors, the rows of paintings he had collected from his travels through Europe, the gentle sound of the river flowing behind the house. I spent hours in his study, looking through his journals where he wrote about life, hope, and the importance of protecting the people you love. The whole property felt like a world built with care, and for a short while, I allowed myself to believe that I had stepped into a future where things would finally be calm. I thought the past had loosened its grip on me. I thought the worst was behind me. But peace is a fragile thing, especially when your past refuses to stay quiet. On the morning of the second day, as I was going through some of the estate paperwork with Ethan Wallace, the lawyer, the sound of harsh, repetitive banging echoed through the house. At first, I didn't understand what it was. The estate was huge, and noises often bounced through the walls. But then I heard shouting, sharp, angry shouting, coming through the intercom connected to the front gate. Ethan paused mid-sentence and looked at me with concern. I felt a chill crawl down my back before I even checked the screen. I walked to the security panel, pressed the button, and the camera feed showed me exactly what I dreaded. My parents standing outside the iron gate, pounding on it like they had every right to be there. My breath hitched. My hands trembled. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I had not seen them since the night they kicked me out with nothing but a coat and $60. Now, their faces were twisted with impatience and something else, desperation. I called for the head of security, Marcus Hale, a steady, broad-shouldered man with calm eyes who always seemed 2 steps ahead of any danger. When he arrived beside me, he glanced at the screen and immediately stiffened. "What are your orders, Miss Rivers?" he asked. I swallowed hard. "Let's hear what they want." We walked outside together to the front of the house, where we could speak to them through the gate speakers. The moment my father heard my footsteps, he shouted, "Jacqueline, open this gate right now." My mother leaned forward, gripping the bars as if she could pull them apart. "We just want to talk," she said, her voice sweet but strained. I recognized that tone, the same tone she used whenever she wanted something. It was a tone that always disappeared once she got it. Marcus rested a hand near the holster on his belt, just in case. His presence steadied me. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. My father scoffed as if the answer were obvious. "We heard you inherited money." "A lot of money." My heart sank. Of course. They didn't come to apologize. They didn't come to ask how I was or whether I was safe. They came because of the $67 million. They came because the daughter they threw away suddenly became worth something. "We deserve a share," my mother added quickly, her voice rising. "We raised you. We took care of you for years. You owe us." The word "owe" hit me like a slap. They had never used that word when I needed them, only when they wanted something from me. "I don't owe you anything," I said quietly. My father's face twisted. Don't be stupid, Jacqueline. Give us a few $1 million and we'll walk away. We won't ask again. I could feel Marcus tense beside me. Ethan, who had stepped outside as well, stood farther back with his arms folded, watching everything unfold with a lawyer's sharp eye. No, I said. The word felt heavy, but firm. I'm not giving you money. My mother's sweet expression vanished instantly, replaced by raw anger. She pointed at me with shaking hands. After everything we did for you? After feeding you, clothing you, letting you live under our roof, this is how you repay us. You kicked me out, I reminded her. My voice cracked a little, but I didn't look away. You didn't care where I went or what happened to me. My father stepped closer to the gate, his jaw tightening. You'll regret this, he spat. You think that big house and all that money will protect you? I felt a sudden surge of fear, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, clear understanding. If I let them in now, they would never leave. They would bleed me dry, twist every part of my life into something toxic, and still claim it wasn't enough. My uncle had given me a new beginning. I would not let them destroy it. I turned to Marcus. Remove them from the property. His nod was quick and respectful. He gestured to the rest of the security team, who moved toward the gate with confident steps. When the guards opened the outer section to escort my parents back onto the road, my mother began screaming, calling me ungrateful, cruel, heartless. My father shouted that he would take legal action, that he would show the world my true nature. Their voices faded only when the gate clanged shut again, sealing the distance between us. But their words stayed with me long after. That night, I lay awake in the estate's master bedroom, a room with soft lighting, warm blankets, and a view of the moonlit river. It should have felt peaceful, but my mind kept replaying their threats. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their angry faces, heard their voices echo against the metal gate. I wonder how they found out so quickly. I wondered how far they would go. A strange feeling grew in my chest, a quiet alarm telling me that this was not over. Marcus checked the grounds twice that night. Ethan reassured me that the will was airtight and that my parents had no legal claim to the money. But reassurance didn't erase the knot in my stomach. As I sat by the window, watching the reflection of the moon on the river, I realized something important. Money doesn't erase danger. It attracts it. And sometimes, the people who want to hurt you the most are the ones who share your blood. I didn't sleep at all, not because I feared what had already happened, but because I sensed what was coming. And deep inside, I knew their return was only the beginning. The night before the fire, the estate felt unusually still, as if the house itself sensed something approaching. I had tried to distract myself by reading in my uncle's study, but my eyes kept drifting to the large window that overlooked the dark stretch of forest beyond the river. The silence pressed against the glass like a warning. Even the usual sounds, the rustling of leaves, the soft hum of the ground's security sensors, felt muted. By the time I went to bed, my nerves were pulled tight like threads ready to snap. I told myself that fear was only a shadow of the past, but deep down, I knew something inside me was bracing for impact. At exactly 3 a.m., the smoke alarms exploded into life with a piercing shriek that ripped me out of sleep. For a heartbeat, I was frozen, lost between dream and waking terror. Then the smell hit me, thick, sharp, unmistakable. Burning wood. Real fire. My heart pounded so violently I could hear it echoing in my ears. I grabbed my robe and ran into the hallway, coughing as smoke curled along the ceiling. Before I could take another step, Marcus Hale appeared, his voice firm but controlled, calling my name. 2 other guards followed behind him, flashlights cutting through the haze. "Miss Rivers, this way," Marcus commanded. His tone allowed no hesitation. I let them guide me down the staircase, my bare feet moving automatically even as fear clouded my mind. The closer we got to the front door, the stronger the smell grew. When we stepped outside, the cold air slapped my face, clearing my thoughts just enough to take in the scene before me. On the right side of the house, bright orange flames licked up the wall, casting wild shadows across the lawn. The fire hadn't reached the upper levels yet, but it was growing steadily, feeding on the wooden siding. The crackling sound was terrifying, hungry, alive. I stood in the freezing grass, trembling from shock and cold, as Marcus yelled into his radio for the fire department. Within minutes, the fire trucks from Hollowbrook County rolled through the front gates, sirens slicing through the night. Firefighters jumped out with practice speed, dragging hoses across the lawn. The jets of water hit the flames with force, releasing steam that rose in thick, white clouds. Watching them battle the fire felt surreal, like watching someone fight a monster crawling up the side of my home. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to stay upright. Ethan Wallace, who had been staying in the estate's guest house to help me transition legally into ownership, came running toward me, his shoes soaking in the wet grass. He pulled a blanket from one of the emergency kits and draped it around my shoulders. His usually calm face was pale. "Are you hurt?" he asked. I shook my head, but my voice refused to come out. I could only watch as the firefighters slowly pushed back the flames. Every so often, I glanced toward the trees beyond the lawn. Something about that darkness tugged at my attention, a faint pull like a whisper I couldn't quite hear. By the time the fire was fully extinguished, dawn was beginning to touch the horizon with a dull gray light. The estate looked wounded, the scorched walls still smoking, the air thick with the bitter smell of burned wood. I felt numb, almost floating above myself, as if none of this was really happening. Marcus spoke quietly with the fire chief, while Ethan stayed beside me, as steady as a lighthouse. Then Marcus returned, his expression grim. "We found footprints," he said. "Fresh ones. They lead toward the trees." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. The security cameras caught two people near the side of the house around the time the fire started. My stomach twisted. "Who?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured toward the driveway, where police cars were rolling to a stop, their lights flashing silently in the early morning light. Officers stepped out, and moments later, two figures were escorted into view. When I saw their faces, my knees nearly gave out. It was my parents. My mother's hair was tangled, her clothes streaked with ash. My father's shirt was half burned on one side, and he kept glancing around as if searching for a way to escape. They looked nothing like the angry, demanding couple from days earlier. They looked desperate, reckless, dangerous. The sight of them standing in handcuffs in front of my uncle's estate, the home they had tried to destroy, pulled something deep inside me apart. My mother recognized me instantly. "Jacqueline," she cried, her voice shrill. "This wasn't supposed to go so far. We just wanted." She choked on her words. My father snarled. "You forced our hand. You think you can just throw us away? You think you're better than us now." His words struck me harder than the cold wind. The officers held him firmly as he tried to step forward. Shock drained through me like ice water. I wanted to feel sadness, but instead I felt clarity, a sharp, cutting truth. They had chosen greed over their own daughter. They had chosen violence over love. They had chosen to destroy what my uncle had left me, simply because they believed they deserved access to something they never built, never earned. The fire had been deliberate, and they would have let me burn inside that house if it meant getting what they wanted. A quiet strength rose in me, steadier than anything I'd felt before. I stepped closer, my voice low but unwavering. "I'm pressing charges." My mother's face crumpled. My father shouted curses that the officers ignored. But I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. The officers confirmed the arrest, reading them their rights as they led them to the police cars. As the doors slammed shut and the vehicles pulled away, the weight of the night settled on me. Not as a burden, but as a turning point. I wasn't the abandoned girl who once slept above a bakery. I wasn't the frightened daughter trying to earn her parents' approval. I was the woman who survived a fire, one that tried to take not only my home but the life I was finally beginning to build. And as the sun rose over the river, casting pale light across the damp lawn, I understood something important. Sometimes, the strongest families are the ones we create. And sometimes, the ones we leave behind are the ones that should never have followed us this far. The weeks leading up to the trial felt strangely suspended, as if time had slowed down just enough to let me process the chaos that had nearly consumed my life. The fire had left one side of the estate blackened, but the repairs were already underway, and each fresh plank of wood, each brush of paint, felt like a quiet reclaiming of my future. Still, no amount of repair could erase the memory of seeing my parents in handcuffs on my lawn, nor the knowledge that they had tried to end the very life they had given me. That truth settled into my bones like a cold weight, firm and undeniable. But beneath it a new strength stirred, a strength that had grown from fire, fear, and finally, clarity. The courthouse in Ravenport, Virginia, was an old white stone building with tall columns and wooden doors, so heavy they required both hands to push open. I stood outside it on the morning of the trial, hands clasped, breath steady, waiting for Ethan Wallace to finish a call with someone inside the courthouse. News had spread quickly, and a thin line of reporters stood behind the metal barriers, their voices sharp with curiosity. Microphones lifted when they spotted me. "Jacqueline, did your parents really try to burn down your house? How much did you inherit? Are you afraid to testify against them?" Their questions cut through the crisp morning air like thrown stones, but I had already made the decision not to let them inside my mind. I kept walking, my heels clicking on the marble steps, my chin lifted. For so many years, I had let fear and uncertainty shape my decisions. Not anymore. I wouldn't let strangers, or even family, bend my life into something I didn't choose. Inside, the courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper. The sound of shuffling feet and murmured voices echoed through the hallway. Ethan touched my shoulder gently, guiding me toward the courtroom. "You don't have to say anything you're not comfortable saying," he reminded me. "I know," I said softly, "but I will." The courtroom doors opened, and a wave of tension rolled over me. My parents were already seated at the defendant's table, dressed in plain county-issued clothing. My mother looked smaller than I remembered, her hair tied back, her expression fading between shame and anger. My father stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, refusing to look at me. For a moment, a memory surfaced. Birthdays, dinners, moments I once believed were filled with love, but they all felt like blurry echoes from another life. The judge entered, a stern woman named Judge Marion Collins, respected throughout the region for her fairness and unwavering calm. When she took her seat, her gaze swept the courtroom with controlled authority. "Let us begin," she said. The prosecution laid out everything with methodical precision. The security footage that caught my parents sneaking onto the property, the fire department's report showing the fire had been set intentionally, the audio recordings from the estate's gate capturing their threats only days earlier. Witnesses came forward, Marcus Hale, several firefighters, even the forensic team who examined the burned siding of the house. Piece by piece, the truth formed a wall of evidence, so solid I could almost feel its weight pressing forward. My parents tried to defend themselves, but their excuses only tangled deeper around them. My mother cried through most of her testimony, claiming they only wanted to scare me into talking, as if fire were a harmless messenger. My father insisted they had not meant to harm me, only to make a point after I refused to share the inheritance. When he said the words, "share the inheritance," the judge's brow tightened noticeably. Ethan leaned toward me and whispered, "They're digging their own grave with every sentence." When it was my turn to speak, I stepped up to the witness stand, feeling the eyes of the courtroom follow me. My palm pressed against the wooden rail, cool beneath my touch, grounding me. I spoke slowly, clearly. I told the court about being kicked out of my parents' house in Maple Creek, about living above the bakery, about my uncle's death, and the moment Ethan told me about the $67 million. I told them how my parents showed up at the estate, demanding money, threatening me when I refused, and how I heard them shout that I would regret this. My voice wavered only once, when I described waking to the smoke alarms at 3 a.m., the terror of smelling fire, the sight of flames climbing the wall, the moment I realized the danger wasn't an accident, but an attack. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. My mother stared at her lap. My father's jaw had finally softened, though not with regret. only defeat. After closing statements concluded, Judge Collins took her time reviewing everything. The courtroom felt frozen. No one breathed too loudly. Even the reporters who filled the back row seemed to wait in suspended quiet. Then she spoke. Given the gravity of the crime, the evidence presented, and the defendant's clear intent to cause harm, she said, her voice steady, this court sentences both individuals to a long-term imprisonment and imposes a substantial financial penalty for attempted arson and endangerment. Her gavel struck once, firm, final, echoing like a door closing on a long, painful chapter of my life. A breath I didn't realize I was holding finally released from my chest. My shoulders loosened, my hands steadied. It wasn't joy I felt, it was relief. It was justice. It was freedom. When I stepped outside the courthouse, sunlight spilled across the stone steps like a warm embrace. The air smelled clean, touched with the coolness of early afternoon. Ethan walked beside me, silent at first, giving me space to absorb everything. You did well, he said eventually. I did what I had to, I replied. Reporters called out again, but I didn't stop. I no longer needed to justify myself. The truth had spoken for me. A car from the estate waited at the curb. As we pulled away from the courthouse, I looked out at the town of Ravenport, the quiet streets, the old river bridge, the people going about their days with the calmness of those unaffected by trials and flames. I felt strangely connected to them, to the ordinary flow of life that I could finally consider joining again. When I returned to the estate, the workers had resumed repairing the burned wall. Their steady movements were comforting. I walked past them and down to the river behind the house. The water glimmered under the late-day sun, moving in slow, peaceful currents, as if reminding me that time continues forward no matter how dark the night behind us has been. For the first time in years, I felt truly free, not just from my parents' control, but from the fear that had lived in me for so long. I wasn't the outcast who slept above a bakery. I wasn't the frightened girl waiting for approval or love that never came. I was Jacqueline Rivers, the woman who stood in a courtroom, faced the truth, and walked out stronger than she entered. I had survived abandonment, greed, and fire. And now, I stood at the edge of a wide, open future, a future shaped not by what others wanted for me, but by what I chose for myself. And this time, I would write the story exactly the way I wanted.